September 20th, 1944. Captain James Megellas crouched behind a demolished bakery wall at the southern end of Nijmegen Bridge, watching 3 German Tiger tanks roll into position 800 meters away. His hands were steady as he raised binoculars, but his mouth was dry. Behind him, scattered across buildings and rubble on both sides of the Waal River, were 437 American paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne Division. Across the river, approaching from 3 different directions, were elements of 3 German divisions, roughly 15,000 men. The mathematics were simple and brutal. 400 Americans against 15,000 Germans. The mission was simpler still. Hold the bridge. Do not let the Germans retake it. Do not let them cut off the British advance toward Arnhem. The entire operation, Market Garden, Montgomery's plan to end the war by Christmas, depended on keeping this single bridge open. Megellas had crossed this bridge 24 hours ago in one of the most desperate river assaults of the war. His company had paddled canvas boats across the Waal under German machine gun fire, losing half their strength before reaching the far shore. They had taken the bridge from the north, while other elements of the 82nd had stormed it from the south. Now they held it, barely. The Germans wanted it back, desperately. He could see why. Nijmegen Bridge was not just any bridge. It was the last major crossing over the Rhine Delta system before Arnhem. Lose this bridge, and the entire German defence of the Netherlands collapsed. Hold this bridge, and the Allies had a direct route into Germany's industrial heartland. Both sides understood the stakes, which meant both sides would pay any price to control it. Megellas watched the Tigers through his binoculars, beautiful machines, in their way. 88mm main guns that could punch through any American tank from over a mile away. Armor, thick enough to shrug off most American anti-tank weapons. Each Tiger represented millions of Reichsmarks in manufacturing cost, thousands of hours of skilled labor, and the combat power to destroy an entire American tank company if used correctly. The 82nd Airborne had exactly 0 tanks. What they had were bazookas, a handful of anti-tank guns, rifles, grenades, and 400 exhausted paratroopers who had been fighting continuously for 3 days. Oh, and they had the bridge itself. Stone and steel, built by the Dutch in 1936, designed to carry civilian traffic across the Waal. Now it was the most strategically valuable piece of real estate in Western Europe. Lieutenant Thomas called from his position in a destroyed storefront. Krauts are forming up in the rail yards. Looks like infantry, maybe a battalion's worth. Megellas scanned left. Thomas was right. German soldiers were gathering in the marshalling area north of the bridge, preparing for an assault. He could see officers organizing units, could see the distinctive coal scuttle helmets catching afternoon light. A battalion meant perhaps 500 to 700 men, against his 143 paratroopers on the north side of the bridge. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The radio crackled. Badger 6, this is Kingfisher. Enemy armor approaching from the east. Count 3. Repeat 3 medium tanks and supporting infantry. Estimate company strength. Megellas acknowledged and checked his map. The east. That was where Captain Kappel's company was dug in. Maybe 90 men holding a perimeter that should have required 3 times that number. Now they faced 3 Panzer IVs and a couple hundred German infantry. He did the mathematics again, adding up the threats. 3 Tigers to the north, a German battalion forming in the rail yards. 3 Panzer IVs and supporting infantry from the east. Reports from Sergeant Bailey on the south side indicated German activity in Nijmegen town itself, probably another battalion-sized element preparing to attack back across the bridge. That was roughly 2,000 Germans converging on his position from 3 directions, with armor support, against 400 Americans with light weapons. The tactical manuals at Fort Benning had been very clear about situations like this. When outnumbered 5 to 1, when facing armor without armor support, when holding an indefensible position against a determined enemy, the manual recommended withdrawal to more defensible terrain. Megellas had read those manuals, had even taught from them as an instructor between deployments. He knew exactly what doctrine said about this situation, except withdrawing meant losing the bridge. Losing the bridge meant Market Garden failed. Market Garden failing meant the war continued into winter, into another year, meant thousands more casualties, meant giving Germany time to organize new defenses, maybe time to deploy the jet aircraft and rockets everyone knew they were developing. So withdrawal was not an option. Which left defense. Defending the indefensible, the first German probe came at 1600 hours. A platoon-sized element, maybe 40 men, advancing cautiously from the rail yards toward the bridge's northern approach. They moved in textbook fashion, using cover effectively, advancing by fire and maneuver, good soldiers executing good tactics. Megellas let them come within 200 meters before he gave the order to fire. 20 American rifles opened up simultaneously, the distinctive crack of M1 Garand's echoing across the bridge approach. The German advance staggered. Men fell. Others dove for cover. Their officer, visible by his gestures even at 200 meters, tried to rally them forward. A single shot from Sergeant Mitchell's Springfield ended that. The German officer dropped, and the advance dissolved. The survivors retreated, dragging their wounded. "First blood to us," Thomas said quietly. At 17:15 hours, the Tigers advanced, infantry moving behind them. This was not a probe. This was an assault. The Germans had learned the American position, understood the defensive layout, and now they were coming with the force necessary to break through. Megellas watched them approach. The Tigers moved slowly, carefully, main guns traversing to target any American position that revealed itself. Behind them, German infantry advanced in dispersed formation, using the tanks as mobile cover. Smart tactics, the kind that should work. "Hold fire," Megellas ordered. "Let them come. Wait for my signal." The Tigers rolled closer. 400 meters. 300. He could see details now, the commander visible in the turret of the lead tank, the infantry moving in practiced coordination. 200 meters. Well within bazooka range. But still, Megellas waited. 150 meters. The lead Tiger's main gun fired, targeting the building where Lieutenant Thomas had set up his command post. The explosion demolished the second floor in a shower of brick and timber. Thomas and his men scrambled out, miraculously unhurt, relocating to backup positions. "Now," Megellas said calmly into the radio, "all bazookas, engage." 6 bazookas, fired almost simultaneously from different positions. 6 rockets streaked toward the Tigers in white trails of propellant. The Germans had seconds to react. The lead Tiger's commander ducked into his hatch. The other 2 Tigers tried to reverse. 5 rockets missed or glanced off the Tiger's heavy frontal armor. The 6th, fired by Private Lentz from a second-story window at near perpendicular angle, caught the lead Tiger on its thinner side armor, just below the turret ring. The explosion was catastrophic. The tank's ammunition cooked off, in a secondary blast that sent the turret spinning 20 feet into the air. The other 2 Tigers immediately reversed, their commanders unwilling to risk the same fate. The German infantry, suddenly without tank support, found themselves exposed in open ground, with American paratroopers firing from prepared positions. They retreated, taking heavy casualties. "Reload," Megellas ordered. "They will try again." They did. Over the next 4 hours, the Germans launched 5 separate attacks on the bridge from 3 different directions. Each attack was methodical, well-planned, executed by professional soldiers using sound tactics. Each attack failed. The mathematics that should have favored the Germans, 15,000 against 400, did not account for certain realities. The Americans held the bridge itself, which meant the Germans had to attack across open approaches that offered minimal cover. The Americans had prepared positions, had pre-registered firing lanes, had positioned their limited anti-tank weapons for maximum effectiveness. And the Americans were paratroopers. Every man had volunteered for airborne service, had survived brutal training designed to weed out anyone without exceptional physical and mental toughness, had jumped into Normandy 3 months earlier and survived. These were not garrison troops or rear echelon personnel. These were elite infantry, and they fought like it. But elite or not, 400 men could not hold indefinitely against 15,000. Megellas knew it. His officers knew it. The enlisted men knew it. The question was not if the Germans would eventually break through, but when, and whether the 82nd could hold long enough for reinforcements to arrive. At 2200 hours, Captain Kappel radioed from the eastern perimeter. "Badger 6, we are getting hammered. The panzers are staying back, using their main guns like artillery. We have taken casualties. I have got maybe 60 effectives left, and ammunition is getting tight. 60 men, from an original 90, 1/3 casualties in 6 hours. That was unsustainable. Can you hold?" Megellas asked, knowing it was a stupid question. Kappel would hold until he had no men left or until someone ordered him to withdraw, and nobody was issuing withdrawal orders. "We will hold," Kappel confirmed. "But we need ammunition, especially bazooka rockets. We have got 2 rockets left and 3 panzers that need convincing to leave." Megellas checked his own ammunition status. The 82nd had jumped into Holland with whatever they could carry. Resupply had been sporadic at best. The American logistics system, so effective in France, had not yet caught up to the rapid advance through Belgium and into the Netherlands. The paratroopers were running on what they had brought with them, plus whatever they could scrounge. "I will see what I can do," Megellas said, knowing he had nothing to give. Every unit was running low. Every position faced the same ammunition crisis. The Germans knew it too. They had to. Standard German tactical doctrine emphasized reconnaissance and intelligence gathering. The Germans had been probing American positions for hours, taking casualties deliberately to map out defensive arrangements. They knew roughly how many Americans held the bridge. They knew the Americans lacked armor support. They had to know ammunition was running low, which meant the next major assault would probably be the decisive one. The Germans would mass their forces, accept the casualties necessary to break through, and retake the bridge through sheer weight of numbers and firepower. That assault came at 0230 hours, September 21st. Under cover of darkness, the Germans had repositioned armor and concentrated infantry. Now they came from 2 directions simultaneously, north and east, with the clear intention of splitting American defenses and overwhelming the bridge. Megellas watched tracers arc through the darkness as German machine guns suppressed American positions. He heard the distinctive sound of German tank engines, multiple vehicles, moving forward under cover of suppressing fire. This was it. This was the attack that would decide whether Market Garden succeeded or failed. "All positions," he radioed, his voice calm despite adrenaline singing through his veins. "Prepare to engage. Hold your fire until you have clear targets. Make every shot count." The Germans had numbers. They had armor. They had artillery support that American paratroopers lacked. What they did not have was the bridge. And 400 American paratroopers intended to make them pay in blood for every meter. The battle that followed would be remembered as one of the most intense small unit actions of the war. German infantry, supported by at least 6 tanks, pressed forward against American positions that should have been overrun in the first 15 minutes. But the 82nd did not break. Individual squads, reduced to 4 or 5 men, held buildings against platoon-sized German attacks. Machine gun crews fired until their barrels glowed red, then switched to pistols when ammunition ran out. Bazooka teams scored impossible hits against German armor from point-blank range. Private Lentz, the same soldier who had destroyed the Tiger earlier, engaged a Panzer IV at a range of 30 meters. The German tank had broken through the perimeter and was advancing toward the bridge itself. Lentz stepped into the street, exposed himself completely, and fired his bazooka directly at the tank's frontal armor. The rocket penetrated, and the Panzer brewed up in flames. German infantry shot Lentz 3 times as he reloaded. He survived, barely, and would spend 6 months recovering. At Kappel's position on the eastern perimeter, the situation deteriorated past critical. German infantry had infiltrated to within grenade range. Kappel himself was wounded, shrapnel from a German stick grenade, leaving his left arm useless. He continued directing his surviving men with his right hand, pointing rather than saluting. Kappel radioed, "We are down to rifles and grenades. The panzers are closing." Megellas made a decision that violated every tactical principle he had ever learned. He pulled 20 men from the southern perimeter, the one relatively quiet sector, and sent them running across the bridge under fire to reinforce Kappel. It left the southern approach dangerously undermanned, but Kappel's position could not hold without reinforcement, and losing Kappel meant losing the bridge. The 20 men, led by Lieutenant Sims, crossed the bridge at a dead run, while German artillery bracketed the span. 2 men fell to shrapnel. The other 18 reached Kappel's position and immediately entered the fight. They brought 30 bazooka rockets, ammunition collected from other positions, and carried across the bridge in bandoliers. It was enough, barely. The panzers, confronted with renewed anti-tank fire, withdrew to safer range. The German infantry, having taken horrific casualties in close quarters fighting, pulled back to regroup. At 0540 hours, as dawn began to break over Nijmegen, the German assault faltered, not because the Germans lacked courage or capability, but because they had thrown 2,000 men against 400 Americans in prepared positions and had broken themselves against that defense. Megellas walked the perimeter as light returned. What he saw shocked him, even though he had lived through it. Bodies, German bodies primarily, littered the approaches to the bridge. Destroyed vehicles smouldered. Buildings that had survived centuries of Dutch history were reduced to rubble. And everywhere, exhausted American paratroopers maintained their positions, checking ammunition, treating wounded, preparing for the next assault. "Sir." Sergeant Bailey approached, his face grey with fatigue. "We are below 50% strength in most positions. Kappel has got maybe 40 men still effective. Thomas lost his entire 3rd platoon when that building collapsed. We are out of bazooka rockets except for what Sims brought over. Rifle ammunition is critical." Megellas nodded. The numbers were devastating. The 82nd had started with 437 men holding the bridge. After one night of combat, they had perhaps 280 still combat effective. 1/3 casualties. Ammunition nearly exhausted, no hope of resupply before noon at the earliest, and the Germans still had 13,000 men, still had armour, still needed to retake the bridge. "Can we hold?" Bailey asked quietly. Megellas looked at his sergeant, a man who had jumped into Normandy beside him, had fought across France, had paddled across the Waal under fire, a man who deserved an honest answer. "We will hold," Megellas said, "because we have to." What Megellas did not know, could not know as he stood in the rubble of Nijmegen that morning, was what the Germans were thinking on the other side. That story would emerge decades later, pieced together from German military records and post-war interviews with surviving officers. Oberst Heinrich Weber commanded the German forces attempting to retake Nijmegen Bridge. He was a professional soldier, career Wehrmacht, with experience dating back to Poland in 1939. He had fought in France, in North Africa, on the Eastern Front. He understood modern warfare, understood what was possible and what was not. And on the morning of September 21st, standing in his command post 3 kilometers from the bridge, Weber understood that he was facing something he had not encountered before. Not superior numbers, not better equipment, something else. Something that made 400 men able to hold against 15,000. The Americans, his operations officer reported, have sustained approximately 35% casualties. We estimate they have perhaps 250 effectives remaining. Ammunition is assessed as critically low. They have limited anti-tank capability remaining. Weber nodded. The intelligence was accurate. He had lost over 800 men finding out exactly what the American defensive positions looked like. But now he knew. He knew where every American machine gun nest was positioned. He knew where the bazooka teams operated. He knew the fields of fire, the dead zones, the vulnerable approaches. "And our casualties?" Weber asked, though he already knew. 837 killed or seriously wounded. Herr Oberst. Tank losses are 3 Tigers destroyed, 2 damaged. 4 Panzer IVs destroyed, 1 damaged. The 10th SS has refused to commit additional armour without infantry support, and the infantry commanders are reporting morale problems. Morale problems. That was the polite way of saying his men were refusing to attack across open ground, into prepared American positions after watching their comrades get cut down in waves. Weber could not blame them. He had watched through field glasses as German infantry, good soldiers following proper tactics, had been systematically destroyed by American defensive fire. The 10th SS has how many tanks remaining in reserve? Weber asked. 14 Panthers, 7 Tigers. Herr Oberst. 21 tanks, more armour than the Americans had faced in total. Plus Weber still had roughly 12,000 men under his command who had not yet been committed to the assault. In theory, the mathematics still favoured Germany. In practice, Weber was starting to understand that mathematics alone did not determine outcomes. What are the American reinforcement estimates? He asked. British armour is advancing from the south. Leading elements are approximately 15 kilometres away, delayed by destroyed bridges and German defensive positions. Estimated arrival at Nijmegen is late afternoon, possibly early evening. So Weber had perhaps 12 hours. 12 hours to take the bridge before British tanks arrived and the situation became hopeless. 12 hours to commit his remaining forces, accept whatever casualties were necessary, and break the American position through sheer weight of numbers. It was possible. Militarily, tactically, mathematically possible. The Americans were exhausted, low on ammunition, badly depleted. One more major assault, properly coordinated with maximum force, would probably break them. Probably. Weber thought about the night's fighting, about how German infantry had reached the bridge itself, had been within meters of seizing it, and had been driven back by Americans who should have been combat ineffective. About the bazooka team that had destroyed a Panzer IV at point-blank range despite being shot multiple times. About the machine gun crew that had continued firing after their position took a direct hit from a tank gun, the survivors pulling, the gun from the rubble and resuming fire. These were not normal soldiers. Wehrmacht troops, even good ones, would have broken under that pressure. But paratroopers, elite airborne infantry, men who had volunteered for the most dangerous duty, trained to exceptional standards, they did not break easily. And American paratroopers, Weber was learning, did not break at all. Herr Oberst, his operations officer prompted, orders for the next assault? Weber looked at his map, looked at the casualty figures, looked at the time estimate for British reinforcement, made a calculation that had nothing to do with tactics and everything to do with arithmetic. We will probe their positions, Weber said slowly. Limited attacks to maintain pressure, but no major assault. We are conserving forces for mobile defence when the British armour arrives. His operations officer looked shocked. Herr Oberst, we still outnumber the Americans. We have armour reserves. One more push could take the bridge. One more push will cost us another 1,000 casualties, Weber said flatly. And we will probably fail again. These Americans, they are not going to break. I have seen enough to know that. We are going to lose men we need for the defence against British armour, and we are not going to take that bridge. It was a remarkable admission. A German colonel with overwhelming numerical superiority, with armour reserves, with every tactical advantage except the bridge itself, was declining to attack, not from cowardice, not from incompetence, from professional calculation that the cost would exceed the benefit. Weber's decision was never recorded in official German documents. He would not have put such an admission in writing. But decades later, in interviews conducted by American military historians, Weber was honest about his thinking that morning. I had 15,000 men, he said in a 1984 interview. They had 400, but they held the bridge, and that made all the difference. Every attack we launched had to cross open ground into prepared positions. They had clear fields of fire. They had positioned their anti-tank weapons perfectly. And they fought like, like men possessed. Like men who knew losing was not an option. The interviewer asked why Weber had not committed his full strength in one overwhelming assault. "Because I watched 800 men die trying to take that bridge," Weber replied. Good men, experienced soldiers. And they could not dislodge 400 Americans. If I committed my remaining 12,000 men, maybe we take the bridge. Probably we take it. But the cost would be 4,000 casualties. And then the British tanks arrive and I have no reserves to stop them, so I lose the bridge anyway and I lose my army too. It was the cold arithmetic of attrition warfare. Weber could probably take the bridge, but holding it afterward, with a decimated force against British armour, was impossible. So he chose to preserve his strength for the defence he knew was coming. Also, Weber added in that interview, and I will be honest with you, my men did not want to attack again. They had seen what happened to the previous assaults. Soldiers will attack when they believe they can win. These men did not believe they could win. Not against those Americans on that bridge. Back at Nijmegen, Megellas and his paratroopers had no idea that the German commander had decided not to launch another major assault. They prepared for attacks that never came. They rationed ammunition for battles that did not materialize. They waited for the final German push that would determine whether they lived or died. Instead, the Germans probed. Small unit actions, harassing fire, enough to keep the Americans pinned and prevent rest, but not the all-out assault that Megellas expected. It was confusing, nerve-wracking, exhausting in a different way. The waiting was almost worse than the fighting. At 1400 hours, a sound rolled across Nijmegen that made every American paratroopers look up. Tank engines. Coming from the south. "British armour!" someone shouted. "The British are here!" Megellas watched through his binoculars as the lead tanks of the Guards' armoured division rolled into Nijmegen. Sherman tanks, 17-pounders, infantry and half-tracks, artillery pieces being towed forward. The weight of British armour that should have been here 2 days ago. The Germans began withdrawing. Not a rout, not a panicked retreat, but a professional withdrawal by a professional army that recognized the situation had changed. British armour meant the Americans now had tank support. The bridge was lost. Weber pulled his forces back to prepared positions east of Nijmegen, conserving strength for the defensive battle he knew was coming. A British captain dismounted from his tank and approached Megellas. "Bloody hell," the Brit said, looking at the carnage around the bridge. "You chaps have had a rough go." Megellas almost laughed. A rough go. That was one way to describe holding off 15,000 Germans for 36 hours. "We held the bridge," he said simply. "That you did." The British captain agreed. Command said it was vital. Said Market Garden depended on it. Market Garden. The operation was already failing further north. British paratroopers at Arnhem were being cut off, surrounded, destroyed. The bridge at Nijmegen had been held, but the strategic objective was slipping away. Still, 400 Americans had held this bridge, had faced impossible odds and had not broken. That had to mean something. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The butcher's bill came due over the following days as casualty reports were compiled. The 82nd Airborne had held Nijmegen Bridge with 437 men. After 4 days of continuous combat, 193 were still combat effective, 87 were dead, 157 were wounded seriously enough to require evacuation, 60% casualties. For comparison, military doctrine considered a unit combat ineffective after 25% casualties. The 82nd had sustained more than double that and had continued fighting. The German losses were harder to calculate precisely. Oberst Weber's unit reports, recovered after the war, showed 837 killed in direct assaults on the bridge. Wounded totaled approximately 2,040, 3 German divisions had committed roughly 4,500 men to retaking Nijmegen Bridge. Of those, 63% became casualties. The Americans had killed or wounded more Germans than their own total strength. 400 men had inflicted casualties on over 2,800 enemy soldiers. The kill ratio was roughly 7-1 in favor of the defenders. These numbers would be studied at military academies for decades afterward. War College instructors used Nijmegen Bridge as a case study in defensive operations, in what elite infantry could accomplish in prepared positions, in how morale and training could overcome numerical disadvantage. But numbers, even remarkable numbers, did not fully capture what happened at Nijmegen. The statistics showed tactical excellence. They showed that 400 well-trained, highly motivated men in prepared defensive positions could hold against overwhelming numbers. They showed that the defenders' advantage, when exploited by elite troops, could overcome seemingly impossible odds. What the numbers did not show was the human cost. The 87 dead Americans each had families, had futures, had lives cut short holding a bridge in a foreign country as part of an operation that ultimately failed its strategic objectives. The 2,800 German casualties were also men with families, with futures, with lives destroyed attacking a bridge they could not take. Megellas sat in a Dutch farmhouse 3 days after the battle, writing letters to families of men who had not survived. Private Lentz would live but would never walk properly again, his legs shattered by German rifle fire. Lieutenant Thomas had been killed on the second day when a German 88 shell hit his position directly. Sergeant Mitchell, the sniper who had killed the German officer on the first day, had been found dead at his position, still clutching his Springfield, surrounded by spent brass. How did you explain to a mother that her son had died holding a bridge in a town she had never heard of, as part of an operation that had failed? How did you tell her that his death had meaning when the strategic objective had not been achieved? Megellas wrote the truth. Your son fought with extraordinary courage. He held an impossible position against overwhelming odds. He did not break. He did not surrender. He gave his life alongside men who will remember him for as long as they live. It was inadequate. All such letters were inadequate. But it was true. A week after the battle, Captain Kappel found Megellas in the company command post. Kappel's left arm was in a sling, but he had refused evacuation. Sir, I have been thinking about the bridge, about why we held. We held because we had no choice, Megellas said. No. Kappel shook his head. The Germans had no choice either. They needed that bridge as badly as we did. More, maybe. But we held and they did not take it. Your point? My point is that we won not because we were better soldiers. The Germans were professional, experienced, well-equipped. We won because we were defending. Because holding a position requires less than taking it. Because 400 men in prepared defences with clear fields of fire can stop 15,000 men attacking across open ground. Megellas considered this. Kappel was right, tactically. Defence was easier than offence, especially when defending a bridge with limited approaches. But that did not fully explain what had happened. The Germans had attacked with armour, with artillery, with tactics that should have broken the American position. We also won, Megellas said slowly. Because every man in the 82nd knew what failing meant, knew that losing the bridge meant Market Garden failed, meant the war continued, meant more men died. That knowledge, that understanding of what was at stake, that made men do impossible things. Like Lentz stepping into the street to kill that panzer. Like Lentz. Megellas agreed. Like your 40 men holding the eastern perimeter when they should have been overrun. Like every squad that fought to the last round and then fought with bayonets and rifle butts. The Americans had not won through superior numbers or equipment. They had won through a combination of tactical advantage, fighting, spirit, and the simple calculus that men defending something they believed in would pay any price to hold it. Years later, historians would debate whether Market Garden could have succeeded if various factors had been different, if the weather had cooperated, if intelligence had been better, if the British had moved faster. The debate continued for decades, analysis and counter-analysis, wargaming the operation to see what might have changed the outcome. But for the men who fought at Nijmegen Bridge, the strategic success or failure of Market Garden was almost irrelevant. They had been given a mission: hold the bridge, do not let the Germans retake it. They had accomplished that mission at terrible cost. Whether higher command used that success effectively was beyond their control. Megellas received the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions at Nijmegen. He refused to attend the ceremony unless every surviving member of his company received recognition. The compromise was that the entire company received the Presidential Unit Citation, acknowledging their collective achievement. Private Lentz, recovering in a hospital in England, received the Medal of Honor. When they told him, he reportedly said, "I just did my job. Everyone did their job. That is why we held." Lieutenant Sims, who had led the 20-man reinforcement across the bridge under fire, received the Silver Star. He survived the war and became a high school teacher in Ohio, where he taught history and never mentioned Nijmegen unless students specifically asked. Captain Kappel recovered from his wounds and commanded a company in the Battle of the Bulge 3 months later. He survived the war, returned to Nebraska, and lived to age 92. In his final interview before his death in 2006, he was asked what he remembered most about Nijmegen. "The men?" Kappel said without hesitation. "I remember men doing things that should have been impossible, holding when they should have, broken. Fighting when they were out of ammunition, refusing to give ground because giving ground meant failing the mission. I saw what Americans could do when they understood what was at stake. It was extraordinary. The bridge itself, the physical structure that 400 Americans died to defend, still stands. It was rebuilt after the war, widened and modernized, but the original span remains. Dutch civilians placed a memorial at the southern end, honoring the American and British soldiers who fought there. Every year, on September 20th, the anniversary of the battle, Dutch veterans organizations hold a ceremony. Fewer American veterans attend each year as age takes its toll. But the Dutch remember. They remember that 400 American paratroopers held a bridge against 15,000 Germans for 4 days. They remember that those Americans paid in blood for Dutch freedom. They remember that when faced with impossible odds and certain death, those Americans chose to stand and fight rather than retreat. In 1994, the 50th anniversary of the battle, James Megellas returned to Nijmegen. He was 77 years old, grey-haired, walking with a slight limp from a wound received in the Bulge 3 months after Nijmegen. Dutch schoolchildren lined the streets as he and other American veterans walked to the memorial. A reporter asked Megellas what he felt, returning to the bridge after 50 years. "I feel old," Megellas said with a slight smile. "And I remember the men who did not get to be old, the 87 who died here. They were kids, most of them, 18, 19, 20 years old. They held this bridge because that was their duty, because they trusted their training and their officers and each other. And they died doing it." "Do you think it was worth it?" the reporter asked. Market Garden failed. The strategic objective was not achieved. Megellas looked at the bridge, at the memorial, at the Dutch civilians who had gathered to honor the American veterans. "We held the bridge," he said simply. "That was our mission. We accomplished it. Whether the larger operation succeeded or failed was beyond our control. What mattered was that we did our job." He paused, emotional, despite 5 decades of distance. "And yes, it was worth it. Look around. The Netherlands is free. These people are free. They rebuilt their country. They live in peace. That is what we fought for. Not for the bridge itself, but for what the bridge represented. Freedom. The right to live without tyranny. If holding this bridge for 4 days contributed to that, even in some small way, then it was worth every sacrifice." The German perspective emerged gradually over the decades following the war. Oberst Weber, the German commander who had declined to launch a final all-out assault, was initially reluctant to discuss Nijmegen. When he finally agreed to interviews in the 1980s, his assessment was professional and remarkably candid. The Americans who held that bridge were exceptional soldiers, Weber said in an interview conducted in 1984. I commanded good men, experienced men. We had numerical superiority. We had armor. We had every advantage except the bridge itself, and we could not take it. Not because of failure on our part, but because of excellence on theirs. Weber was asked about his decision not to commit his reserves for a final assault. It was a professional calculation, he explained. I could have ordered another attack. I could have thrown 10,000 men at that bridge, and maybe we would have taken it. Probably we would have. But the cost would have been catastrophic. 4,000 casualties. And then British armour arrives and I have no forces to stop them. So I lose the bridge anyway, and I have also lost my army. But some criticised your decision, the interviewer noted. Said you had the Americans beaten, that one more push would have broken them. Weber shook his head firmly. Those critics did not see what I saw. Did not watch American paratroopers continue fighting when they should have been combat ineffective. Did not see men with multiple wounds refusing evacuation because their squad needed them. Did not see bazooka teams engaging tanks at point-blank range, knowing they would probably die. Those Americans were not going to break. I recognized that. My men recognized that. Anyone who criticizes the decision to conserve forces did not face those Americans on that bridge. It was a remarkable admission from a professional German officer. That American fighting spirit, American training, American determination had been so impressive that a German commander with overwhelming superiority chose not to attack rather than accept the casualties necessary to break the defense. Weber died in 1988, 4 years after that interview. In his personal papers, donated to a German military museum, was a letter he had written but never sent to Megellas. It was dated 1983. Captain Megellas, the letter read, I commanded the forces that attempted to retake Nijmegen Bridge in September 1944. I want you to know that your defense of that bridge was the most impressive small unit action I witnessed in 6 years of war. You and your men accomplished something extraordinary. You held when you should have been overrun. You fought when you should have been combat ineffective. You refused to surrender when surrender would have been understandable. The letter continued, I have thought often about those 4 days. About the men I lost attempting to take what you defended. About the decisions I made and the decisions you made. We were enemies then, but I want you to know that I respect what you and your paratroopers accomplished. It was warfare at its most professional, most intense, and most human. I am sorry for the men you lost. I am sorry for the men I lost. But I am not sorry that I faced an enemy worthy of respect. Weber never sent the letter. Perhaps he felt it was inappropriate. Perhaps he thought Megellas would not want to hear from the German commander who had tried to kill him. But the letter was found among his papers, carefully preserved, a testament to professional soldiers' respect for professional soldiers, even across the divide of former enemies. In 2011, long after both Megellas and Weber had died, researchers at the U.S. Army War College conducted a detailed analysis of the Battle of Nijmegen Bridge. They had access to both American and German records, to post-war interviews, to tactical maps and casualty figures. Their conclusion was unambiguous. The defense of Nijmegen Bridge represents one of the most successful small-unit defensive actions in military history, the analysis concluded. 437 American paratroopers held a critical objective against forces 15 times their number for 4 days. They sustained 60% casualties and continued fighting. They inflicted casualties at a ratio of 7-1 against a professional enemy with armor and artillery support, and they accomplished their mission completely. The analysis continued. The tactical lessons from Nijmegen remain relevant. Elite troops in prepared defensive positions can overcome seemingly impossible numerical disadvantages. Training, morale, and leadership matter more than numbers. The defensive advantage, when properly exploited, is decisive. And perhaps most importantly, soldiers who understand why they are fighting, who believe in their mission, who trust their leaders and their comrades, can accomplish extraordinary things. That was the real lesson of Nijmegen Bridge. Not that 400 could always defeat 15,000. Under different circumstances, with different terrain, different leadership, different soldiers, the outcome could have been different. But at Nijmegen, in September 1944, 400 American paratroopers held a bridge against overwhelming odds because they were well-trained, well-led, highly motivated, and fighting for something they believed in. The mathematics said they should have lost. The mathematics were wrong. September 20th, 1944. Captain James Megellas crouched behind a demolished bakery wall at the southern end of Nijmegen Bridge, watching 3 German Tiger tanks roll into position. Behind him were 437 American paratroopers. In front of him were 3 German divisions. The mathematics said the Americans could not win. 4 days later, the Americans still held the bridge. 87 of their comrades were dead, 157 were wounded. But the bridge stood. The mission was accomplished. And 15,000 Germans had learned that mathematics alone did not determine the outcome of battles. Sometimes courage mattered more than numbers. Sometimes training mattered more than firepower. Sometimes 400 men who refused to surrender could hold a bridge against 3 divisions. That was the lesson of Nijmegen. That was the story James Megellas and his paratroopers wrote in blood and sacrifice on a Dutch bridge in September 1944. A story of impossible defense, of men who held when holding should have been impossible, of Americans who looked at 15-1 odds and decided that mathematics did not matter as much as mission. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.